The world feels a bit toxic and blah these days, doesn't it? The same old people coming up with the same old solutions for big problems that still don't work. We need to change the game. Well, welcome to Women Advancing. Join me, host Kate Byrne, in this dynamic bi-weekly podcast, bringing together female founders, funders, and thought leaders. Listen to the people driving change, how they got there, how you can help, and yep, how you might just be the next one to advance. Proof that all ships rise with women at the helm. That's what happens when Women Advance with Kate Byrne.
How do you take on systems as big and entrenched as global displacement, corporate capitalism, and government policy, and still hold on to hope? You got to admit, that's hard. Well, my guest, Christine Mahoney, does it daily. She's a professor at the Batten School of Public Policy. She's an author and the founder of her own social venture, Wayflowering. Christine has built her entire career at the intersection of scholarship and action, challenging the status quo while designing new models for change and sharing them with the next generation of social entrepreneurs. In this episode of Women Advancing, we're going to dive into her work with refugees, impact investing, and the delicate dance of staying idealistic without being naive. Christine doesn't just teach social entrepreneurship, she's actually living it. And she's here to talk about what it really takes to lead with purpose in a world that often resists it. Provides so many different resources and explanations of the entire impact investing spectrum, social enterprise spectrum, and so much more. I hope you like this episode. I know you'll learn a lot from it. Let me know what you think. Let's listen. Oh my goodness. We're so fortunate to have Christine Mahoney, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, professor and author in social entrepreneurship and impact investing, and the founder of Wayflowering, with us on Women Advancing. Christine, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, I have been a longtime fan, for those of you listening, of Christine's for lots of reasons. One, she is just one of those people who she works with intention, but she's also really built a life that's filled with intention, sure, personally, sure, spiritually, but really she's also built her own business and she also teaches with such intentionality. And you're going to hear what I'm referring to in a little bit. So Christine, let's start off. I know you've spent a lot of your career at that intersection of finance and justice. How'd you get there? Like what the song says, how did you get here? What was your journey? What originally drew you to impact investing and kept you?
Yeah, well, I was originally really interested in social justice and environmental justice. And in my youth, I thought we achieved that through policy and government change and advocacy. So I did lots of research on that space. How do we more effectively achieve justice through those strategies? I interviewed hundreds of advocates and activists in the United States and the European Union. I wrote a book about that. And it was really depressing. A lot of times we don't win that fight. We fight the good fight and we don't win it sometimes. I was interested in when government will not reform and when we can't achieve our goals that way. Is there other strategies, right? Rather than just throwing up our hands. Right. And so I got really interested in social entrepreneurship models. And so I built a program on social entrepreneurship and impact investing here at the University of Virginia. And at the same time, I was researching refugee rights around the world. I was doing work in conflict zones, again, still looking at, is there strategies for local advocacy, national level advocacy, global advocacy to help support these people? Over 100 million people forced from their homes through violence and war. And the result of that work was also pretty depressing. People are really living in limbo. They're not allowed to take care of themselves and their families. And I was starting to see really interesting for-profit models supporting refugee entrepreneurs with microfinance, creating social enterprises that were using labor models to support integrating the displaced into new communities. And so I thought, rather than just be depressed and throw up my hands, let's learn a whole new world. So my PhD is in political science. I never had a class on impact investing, in my many, many years of education. So I had to kind of tool up on my own and figure out how do we use these tools of capitalism and to kind of in service of justice.
Which makes so much sense. And I want you, I know this may seem strange, but would you mind define social entrepreneurship? Because I want people to understand what that means. It's different from a nonprofit. Many people may know and think they know what it is. And then also with impact investing, there's such a spectrum. Do you mind like one-liner definitions defining impact investing versus socially responsible investing versus philanthropy, which is a whole different beast in and of itself?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think of both of them as continuums that kind of help us understand it. So you can imagine traditionally we had philanthropy and charity. You can imagine the classic soup kitchen, right? Where well-meaning people are giving money and then some kind of benefit is given to people in need, what we might call beneficiaries. And one of the challenges with that is when the economy tanks, sometimes that money dries up, right? So it's really hard to do that work. Also, the people giving the money, where the power is, are not the same people that are getting the benefit. And so it kind of disconnects power from the people we're trying to serve. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we had these kind of, railroad baron type capitalism, right? Which produced a lot of good innovation, but often at the cost of workers, at the cost of the environment, at the cost of the communities, that were maybe part of the supply chain. And so over time, what we saw is the philanthropic community saying, we need to develop some models that are more financially resilient to the ups and downs of the economy, and that also maybe align with the people we're trying to serve. And at the same time, there was, with the 1960s, we saw this whole movement in let's make sure that our companies aren't, damaging the very planet we live on and harming our children and harming our workers. And so there was this push to have, more and more corporate social responsibility and socially responsible businesses. Until about 20 years ago, we see this intersection in the middle. And it was like, you know what? We can actually build a business often that can serve the very people we want to serve, right? That could be clean water in Africa. That could be solar lanterns in Latin America. We can create companies that really support workers, right? We look at companies that are like bakeries that are helping people that are coming out of incarceration or women that are coming out of abusive homes. How can we actually build companies that have social and environmental missions? The more successful that company is, the more money they make, really, the more they achieve their mission. And so that's what first got me interested, because I was seeing these really incredible entrepreneurs saying, when government fails, whether that's domestically in the United States or around the world, we can still have agency and we can still act and we can still build models that fix problems. And those companies at some point want to grow often and they need capital. And so that's where the world of impact investing comes in. And so another kind of continuum in that space is, people probably have heard a lot about ESG, environmental social governance, right? It's kind of been politicized. There's talk about, these different companies on Wall Street, are some good, are some bad? How are they good? How are they bad? How do we know, right? Really, this whole movement started hundreds of years ago. We can kind of trace it back to the Quakers saying, we're not going to invest in the slave trade. We're going to be thoughtful about our investments and make sure our investments align with our values. And then we saw that kind of approach scale up, through the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, during the Darfur genocide in the early 2000s. This idea that we can divest our capital from industries or companies that we think are not doing good work in the world. And we also have seen, as you pull your money back from what you might think are bad stocks or bad industries like fossil fuels, you need to put it somewhere, right? And so you could just put it in any old company, but increasingly investors that want to make sure that their money is doing good work in the world wanted to have some information about those companies. And so that was this rise of ESG investing, right? Came out of the United Nations and Kofi Annan. Then it led into the UN Principles for Responsible Investing. But it was like, let's give investors some basic information so that they can make informed decisions. And then that has just really developed over the past 20 years to be, much more rigorous, much more nuanced, giving a range of different investors a range of different information so that they can invest with their values. So it's been an exciting time where, impact-oriented investors and entrepreneurs have said, we're going to keep moving the ball forward, kind of regardless of what governments are doing. There's a place for government to support the work, but when it fails to, there's still space for us to do the work.
Right. Because, what you made me think about too is so often there's this misunderstanding or myth, right? That it's all sort of fairy dust and unicorns and feel good and all of that. And so you can't really fix a problem and make money.
And I think that's what's really exciting now. It's like there's this whole realization of really hard-nosed investors saying there is a materiality to this, right? So when, BP was not being environmentally responsible and has the
Right.
Deepwater Horizon crisis, that not only hurt coastal communities and murdered countless marine life, it also had a material impact on the company, which was bad for their investors, right? So there was incredible fines, their stock tanked, there was long-term economic implications. And we can see that again and again, whether it's, Facebook from a governance and responsible treatment of their customers
Right.
at some point. If you think about VW and lying to their customers, right? It's bad for the environment, but it was bad for customers. It was bad for their reputation. It was bad for their bottom line, and ultimately bad for their shareholders.
This is the thing that I never understood. So the timing is right around when you're speaking to 20 years ago. That's right about when I was Publisher Fast Company, we created the Social Capitalist Awards. And that's where my eye was like opened. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Why do we not operate this way? People, planet, profit. So of course, if you don't take care of the environment, that's going to hurt your customer. Your customer is then not going to, well, not only will they not buy your product, they may not be alive. I'm glad we're finally making some headway, but I think really what it is it's everyone understanding Gen Z and such. I know my daughters in particular are willing to make this sacrifice for some of the things like convenience, right? It doesn't matter. It's, there's human trafficking. There's people that are being treated badly. It's filling landfill with old clothes that nobody uses. So I'm heartened too that people are finally kind of understanding that, and that corporations are starting to realize, oh wait, I can't do greenwashing. I thought I could do a little sleight of hand or fudge, and people are saying no.
Right, definitely. And I think that's why you see more of these certification schemes, right? Whether it's, in the beginning, there was like fair trade certified or LEED certified, right? It was different pieces of it. And then obviously, we've seen the growth of the B Corp movement for
Yes.
over 20 years now, right? But they were like, let's give customers and then ultimately investors down the line a more holistic way, and really importantly, an external validated way to
Right.
know if companies are, walking the walk.
Right, really legit. There's been a lot of talk about this massive wealth transfer that's coming down the line. I've heard next year, I've heard by 2030, etc. But it's going to be in the trillions. And women and younger generations are those who are set to be the greatest recipients of it. So for women who want to kind of align their money with their values, where should they even start? And are there some like 3 key questions they want to ask or things to look for where they can kind of sniff out, friend or foe, truth or false kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some really easy ways, right? If people have traditional type jobs and they have traditional retirement accounts, it's as simple as asking, is there a ESG fund within our, asset manager? I think for people maybe with some more resources, they're looking at diversifying who's currently managing their money. It's looking at some of these companies that have been doing it for a long time, right? The Calverts of the world and the Parnassus, and really they've been committed to it. And it's not just like clearly they're jumping on the bandwagon because it's, sexy now. Then there has been so much progress made from a metric standpoint. So BlackRock, right? One of the biggest asset managers in the world, they are using an ESG kind of measurement tool that really focuses on materiality, right? What are these pieces of environmental responsibility data, social responsibility data, and governance data that really has a material impact on shareholders and investors' bottom lines? And so I think if these really significant investors are using those types of scorecards, right, like MSCI, et cetera, Morningstar has a rating. Those are pretty reliable, right? Like, yes, there is a million of them out there, but if you use the biggest ones, right, that are well tracked, that's a good place to start. And then for people that are really inheriting wealth, right, and they might have a family office, one thing is, right, they think about their philanthropy often in one pocket, you might say. One of our UVA alumni wrote a book about how there's these two pocket thinking. You make your money and you give your money from one pocket, but you invest in another, and you kind of think of them as quite divorced from each other. I think the younger generation recognizes that's not necessary, so it's just more natural for them. But they need to be pushing asset managers that were used to working with, the previous generation. Then it's like, okay, what are the funds that are available to us? And creatively, especially family offices, which can be a lot more thoughtful with their philanthropy, they can be doing things like program-related investments, mission-related investments. A program-related investment, like instead of giving $50,000 to a soup kitchen, you could give $50,000 to a culinary social enterprise that's helping re-educate people coming out of incarceration so that they don't need a soup kitchen, right? And you might lose it because it's risky, but you were going to get 0% ROI on it anyway. But you might not, and then you might get it back, and then you can give again, and you've had this super sustainable impact in the world.
And I love that thinking, because it really is. It's a better way of making your money work for the money, but also for everyone else around you. So, I know that women are increasingly, or some of them at least, some are getting more and more sort of in the investing space, still underrepresented. What myths about women and money would you love to just get rid of, or just once and for all, everybody, stop it?
Yeah, I think one is like, they're not interested, right? I mean, I see that in the university a lot. Like, it's a real soft kind of discriminatory thing. Like, oh, we just thought you weren't interested. Like, oh, so we just didn't invite you, right? It's like, well, guess what? They are interested, right? You and I are seeing that here in Charlottesville, where all of these women in different angel investment groups or even philanthropists are saying, like, coming together and doing peer-to-peer education. What we're seeing in some of the bigger markets is women-oriented angel investing groups, right? Also, providing boot camps to each other so that they can learn what they might not have learned if they majored in anything other than finance when they were in college or in their graduate work. So I think that they are interested. They're doing a really great job on peer-to-peer. And I think for those that maybe are in a market that isn't quite there yet, like that doesn't have the networks, there is a lot available online, right? So you've been involved with SoCap, and I always direct my students and to SoCap. There's such incredible, great virtual content to kind of start dipping your toe in the water. Global Impact Investment Network also has a ton of resources available. And they're nice because you can be busy and out and about in your day and listen to, 20 minutes of an incredible panel that maybe it happened last year, but the content is still super fresh, and it can be a little bit more dynamic than reading a big finance textbook.
A big tome, which can get a little bit dense. And I'm so glad, because in the beginning when I was running SoCap, I can remember everybody was so concerned, you have to come on site to see it, etc. Then COVID hit. And it's like, well, no, we're going to have much broader impact if we open it up to a lot of people, and we should just house it. So I'm so glad that people are starting to take advantage of that too. Mm-hmm. All right. So that's all nice, fine. Now you found it was time for you yourself to walk the talk. So Christine has created, it's beautiful. I have yet to be there, but I know it's beautiful because if you go to the site, wayflowering.org, you'll see it's beautiful. Tell everyone a little bit about Wayflowering and what inspired you to build it.
Sure. So my last book was on how do we use impact investing to support the world's, over 100 million refugees and forcibly displaced. And so I was going to summits. We were standing up the first global nonprofit that was connecting investors with refugee entrepreneurs and refugee businesses. It was called the Refugee Investment Network. And while we were doing that work, we were traveling the world. And then when COVID hit and, the stay-at-home orders hit, we had to stay here. And then the question was, how do we continue doing this work when everybody and everything seems frozen? We have a small farm just outside of Charlottesville. And so I had worked with all these really creative social enterprise models that were rehabilitating tobacco fields to grow organic indigo, to supply Patagonia, lavender models that are rehabilitating former mine land in Appalachia to grow lavender and create jobs for people coming out of incarceration, right? So I knew all of these really creative models that were out there that were having an environmental impact and a social impact. And I was like, well, maybe we can do that right here. I worked in the greenhouses for my work study job when I was in college, and I've always loved flowers. And so I decided I'm going to start a regenerative flower farm. I'm going to sequester carbon. We're going to support pollinators, support biodiversity, to have the environmental side, and create jobs for resettled refugees. So I was on the board of the International Rescue Committee here in Charlottesville. We have traditionally, historically been a big reception city. So that was the idea. Like, we know that there are challenges when people are getting resettled. They might not have transportation. They might not have English language skills yet. They might need a lot of flexibility for childcare and things like that. And so that was the beginning of it all. And so we did it, and we learned a lot, and we're still learning a lot. We're in our 4th year now. We've had workers from Congo and Rwanda, Latin America, Middle East. And so it's been cool. And we're sequestering about 66 metric tons of carbon a year now between our stewardship and our our no-till models. And so that too, I mean, I think that's what's powerful about social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Like, as I mentioned, when governments fail, we can still act. But even during COVID, when it felt like, what can any one little person do? It just felt like the problems were so huge. It was a strategy where I can at least do this, right? I can at least sequester this carbon. We are also, my husband has a kind of sister company called Thistle Rock Mead Company. It's the first net zero mead company in the country. We're all on electric vehicles. So really dramatically reducing energy usage while also sequestering through our regenerative ag practices. So it's been a really cool learning journey, because I've been surprised how much impact we can actually have. We're not Patagonia yet. And I don't know if we will be, because the whole goal is about local and about mitigating carbon from the local strategy. But I think as people do more of this, and they create companies in their communities that are creating alternative strategies, in my case, for instead of shipping in flowers from halfway around the world that have been flown on a plane, that have been sprayed with horrible pesticides, that may have had really bad labor practices where it was coming from, that you can get a clean, beautiful, local, carbon-free product right here in your own community. And I think it helps me teach better as well, because
That's what I was going to ask you. How is this impacted? Because all of a sudden you can say, I've got a great case study for you.
Yeah, well, I think there's two big ways. Well, maybe 3, right? As a professor of social entrepreneurship, I think I can now teach even more effectively, because I know really what it means to have enough cash flow to run your payroll and make sure you're paying your taxes and all of that piece. Yeah, that's one piece. Then as a professor of impact investing, it helps me understand the entrepreneurs that are pitching even better, I think, and really why it's so important for them to really understand their business and understand their numbers and understand their costs, and why investors want to see that in an entrepreneur they're investing in. And then third, I teach at a school of leadership and public policy. A lot of our students have been government affairs majors, or maybe environmental sciences majors, or maybe criminal justice reform, right? They've majored in the things that they care about and the problems that they care about. Right. And private sector regulation is often a piece of solutions, right, when it comes to government. And yet many policy students have never had really any experience in the private sector or in a business. So it's really highlighted for me, if you want to be a policymaker and go to a policy school, you really ought to spend some time deeply understanding the private sector if you hope to regulate it. And so that, even just like looking at how challenging the regulations were to stand up a small meadery, which is essentially a small winery, it took 2 years. When you talk about, I do work on impact investing in Appalachia. When you talk about economic development in some areas that are so hard, and people just don't have the friends and family capital to put layers and layers of barriers in front of them to get anything off the ground, it's just crazy. So that, I think, has been one of the bigger eye-opening learnings for me.
Because that's what I was going to ask, is essentially, what was the biggest surprise? And it sounds like it is an uphill lift, but, some of these aspects that are supposed to be so helpful end up really being sort of hidden obstacles.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book out on the market right now, Abundance. So you maybe have heard of it, by this guy Ezra Klein. Oh, yeah. And I've been reading that, and it's just super resonating with me, because I've seen so many policies that have been put in place by smart people, really well intentioned, and the result is outcomes they absolutely do not want to see. And we have to get better at this.
Well, I was just going to say, and it goes back to what you've been learning because now you're walking the talk. You're living, breathing all of it. And that's the thing. I think so often folks, not that Ezra, parachuted in because he's been in the realm for quite a while, but still you can't take away the importance of real lived experience because everything then it's all theory. This should go like this. Well, little did you know that there's some reasons either in the process or the distribution channel or something, there's a hiccup and kind of unwilling that thread to get back to the origin of the problem.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, so if you could write a memo to the next generation of women in impact, may you be many, what would the subject line say?
I think something along the lines of the problems facing us as a species are so huge that we need the power of capital markets to tackle them. I've met so many really well-meaning people that, think philanthropy will be sufficient or even regulation, and it's just not the case. We need to steer the capital markets and private sector companies toward just deeply integrating environmental and social responsibility into their work, right? We just cannot fix the problems that have been created with these philanthropic band-aids. And we have seen that regulation is not sufficient, right? Even in the past, when we've had huge budgets and what some people would argue are big governments, they're almost completely incapable of kind of policing through regulation. And that isn't the best way to do it, right? It's better, I think, to really consider the costs of a private sector company and allow them to grow and succeed and deliver value to customers in a way that is good for our species and the planet.
Triple bottom line. I have a question. Why has it been so hard for these companies to do this? Is it because of the sacrifice of profit? And on the one hand, you've got, Ed Friedman, stakeholder theory, all of that. But then, so people are saying, and by people, I'm saying everyone, consumers are saying, oh, we want these companies to do this, but, oh, by the way, we invest in them. So we don't want to, suffer any shift or delta in the returns that we get. So does it mean that everybody in the circle needs to kind of say, okay, hand in, I'm down. If I'm going to fall short by 10% or 15%, you're going to deliver less, but I'm going to close the inequity gap. It means we're going to, have less carbon issues. I'm good with that.
Yeah, I think it's a big question. And I think that it deeply gets at, I remember I was interviewing a lobbyist one time when I was working in Brussels, and he was saying that there's a difference between citizens and consumers. And so when you ask the citizen what they want, they might want good regulations, and they might want well-behaving companies, and they might want, ethically produced products. But then when they're the customer and they go to the store, they want the cheapest product available. And I think there's a step back from that, especially in the United States, undergirding that, which is that we have massive poverty in this country, right? The median household income is very low. We have incredible income inequality. And so as long as companies aren't paying workers enough to make the informed choice, the enlightened choice, the educated choice, like they might want to, but they can't. There's probably a category of people that could, but don't. But there's a way bigger category, like in the communities I work in Appalachia, it's just like, a $12 box of organic strawberries is not on the table, right? It's not available. But even if it was available, that wouldn't be a choice. It's not a choice. And
exactly.
And more than half of America, it's not. So I think we have this deep income inequality problem that needs to be solved before it's easier for companies to make that choice.
Yeah, I think it's all sides of the equation just have to take a moment and really do some deep thinking and then make some definite shifts. So in closing, knowing what you know now, and those listening, Christine has this amazing daughter. So it's even in preparation for her and setting the world up, you and John setting the world up for her. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger self?
Other than take a finance class maybe and take an accounting class, because I think they're helpful no matter what you do, whether you go into the nonprofit space or the entrepreneurial space, I think those are helpful. But also, I think learning that you have agency in the world Because, we've seen all of the research out of, psychology. Feeling like you have purpose and agency is a pathway to a more contented life. And I
Right.
feel like now more than ever, but it always feels like that. I'm sure in the 60s and I'm sure in the 1920s, like I'm sure there was all these periods in the past where it felt like the world was on fire. It feels
Yes.
particularly on fire now. Because of the way that our kind of society has changed, everything feels big and complicated. And so I
Right.
see it in a lot of university students right now. I feel like people feel a little frozen. Like, how do we tackle, partisanship? How do we tackle the climate crisis? The problem seems so big. But what starting Wayflowering has shown me, and in the other types of work that I've done in my career, it's like, at least we can do this, or at least I can do this. And I think that's a good question, hopefully for my daughter and the other kids in her class and kids across the country and around the world. Like, what can I do to leave the world better off than I found it? And I think if we kind of if all 8 billion of us or however many of us there are, if that's like kind of the guiding principle, then hopefully leave the world much better off. It's just in a generation.
It would have to be. Oh, well, listen, Christine, thank you so much for joining today. And really, thank you for everything that you're doing on every single level, in the classroom, out in the field, out on the speaking circuit, out on the authorship circle. So many pearls. And I can't wait to see you actually out in the fields.
Yes, you got to come on visit. Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
All right. Thanks. Until next time. Hey, everyone. So what'd you think? Amazing, right? Christine Mahoney is seriously one of the most intentional people I've ever met. And I have great respect and regard for her as a result of that. So KB's key takeaways. One, you really can fix problems and make money through social entrepreneurship. I think there's a little bit of patience that's required. And when you look at the other alternative, where running ramshot all over our planet makes a pretty easy choice in my mind. Second, that notion of citizen versus consumer. So, with that being said, it's going to require that we realize, you know what? I want to keep and help do my part in minimizing and making that equity gap lesser and lesser and lesser. And that doesn't mean that I will suffer. It means I will thrive, as will others. So, pretty much a duh in my mind. Investing alone is not going to do it. Philanthropy alone is not going to do it. Regulation alone is not going to do it. Policy alone isn't going to do it. All of the aspects are. And we, as potential investors, potential consumers, can really vote with our wallet and drive real change. Because at the end of the day, we've got to get the private sector involved. We've got to get corporations understanding, because that's where the breadth of the employees, the inequities, and also the money is. So if we can shift that, wow, such an easy lift happens. And for those, I thought it was interesting, she was talking a bit about for those who are going into government policy, so often they understand their aspect, incentives and such, but they have limited experience actually within the private sector. So as in anything, and those of you who are in sales know this, you always got to kind of think from the customer's aspect, from the customer's side. So for those of you who are looking to get more involved in government policy, dive in and have a much better understanding of private sector. Anyone who's doing anything, know your numbers, especially for social entrepreneurs. It's really important. It's hard enough for those who are just cold, hard for profit. For those social entrepreneurs, you ought to know those numbers even better, and you will from a much deeper level. And I think the last thing was just the question we should be asking ourselves. And that is, with all that's going on in the world, and it's so easy to get frozen and overwhelmed, what can I do? What can I do in my realm? Doesn't have to be, everything always has to be so big and monumental and, oh, the best this, the best that. Doesn't have to be. So what's one thing that I could do that could leave the world better off than the way it is now? Tell you what, we each do that. You do the math, there'll be a whole lot of improvement going on. So look forward to hearing from you and let me know what you think. And until our next conversation, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. May this episode inspire you to move forward. Be sure to go to iTunes, Spotify, katebyrne.co, that's KATEBYRNE.co, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and listen to even more episodes. Here's to strong women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them.
Be sure to meet them on the next Women Advancing. Till next time.